up?
Hey, how are ya?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, I guess, you know, living the dream. Oh,
Ready for the What's up, everybody? Good to see y'all again. It is 10, and since we did have the one meeting that got a little short, we'll go ahead and kind of get going here. I'll let Jen and Kelly, is Kelly on? Yeah. Not quite.
I don't see Kelly on just yet.
Okay, well, I guess then we can take a second. Round 3 for some of you guys, last one.
All right, I think almost everybody's on now. So yeah, I'll kick it over to Kelly to share her screen and we can get going. Last is such a final word. It's
Yeah.
the last training ever.
Last of this subject material, there's going to be more trainings.
David, I had the calendar wrong.
Oh, welcome, Steve.
Yeah, it's your Zoom I had for 10 a.m.
Okay. I thought that might be the case. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Kelly and Jen will take it away, and we'll get going.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and good to see you all again. Hope you had a good weekend, although I guess it's Wednesday already, so when the weekend is long gone, right? This did not, oops, I shared from the wrong thing. Hold on, one sec. I'm like, that's not the right screen. I hit share from beginning instead of current slide where I was. Where are you? Let's stand forward. Here we go. Okay, are you seeing a big blue screen?
Yep.
Yes, okay. Super, well, good to see you all again. Like I said, we're here to kind of wrap up sort of the first of these discussions around our key target audiences. Last week we talked a little bit about the funnel. So just kind of reminding you here of sort of the idea of, wanting to think about, is the person that's going to read your story likely a new visitor to the site, someone that doesn't come very often, or are those folks, is your story really, alluring to the readers that come regularly to your site? Do they have a habit with you? Or is your story really focused in on the subscribers? So the sort of top, middle, and bottom of the funnel idea. We also then talked about the first of our key target audiences, Family Forward. And let's review that just a little bit. So when we think about what a Family Forward audience is seeking, they're really looking for impact. And remember, this audience is not just about people that have kids directly in their home. This isn't people that are, sort of the parents shipping their kids off to school or daycares or trying to balance online learning as it is. This is a much more extended group, extends to like grandparents, extends to people thinking about their families as people in their neighborhood, as people in their church community. It's really that sense of idea of like, how I'm going to tap on this story if I can understand why reading it would benefit me personally or the people that I love and I interact with regularly. And that's also what will entice them to share. One of our best avenues for drawing in, new readers with this audience. So really focusing in on how do we help these readers understand what's going on in their communities, whether it's a news issue, whether it's a wonderful story about a person in their community. We want to help them really break down that issue so that they understand the impact of it on them in their lives. Today, we're going to jump into this Know the Score audience and talk a little bit about who they are. This group, as you can kind of see from the faces here, is predominantly younger. Again, these groups aren't necessarily about demographics. It's more about the reason that they seek out news. These are all strong news consumers. And it's really about, why are they going to tap on this? What benefit are they going to get if they tap on this article? So this group is really a little bit on the younger side, but 30% of them are over the age of 50. So we're not talking about only, young sports fans here. It is predominantly men, but 40% of this group is made up of women. And about half of the group has young kids in the home. So, you can kind of see a little bit of overlap between these two audiences, but some distinguishing characteristics that we'll talk about here a little bit more. And I just want to really emphasize this. This isn't just about the sports fan, even though the kind of title of this group sounds very sportsy. This group is really looking for a different benefit that we'll talk about here more, although they do tend to care about sports or other passion topics as well. So who is this group? This group describes themselves as sort of the talkative, motivated folks in our communities. It reminds me of sort of the type A go-getters. They probably have, personal improvement goals. They're very active in their communities. And they really want to have sort of the right thing to contribute to the conversation, to the community, and take a lot of pride in understanding the major issues that are happening. As well as the things that are happening in their community when you talk about fun and pride, community pride. So they care a lot about their community. They want to be involved in it, and they want to be able to talk to other people about it. Whereas, so to contrast that a little bit with Family Forward, these folks want to be informed and sound smart to their neighbors. They want to be able to have those sort of key talking points about the biggest issues. They may not need the deep analysis, but they want to have the sort of top level, mid-level understanding of an issue. Whereas Family Forward is much more motivated by something that personally affects them or their family, not necessarily caring as much about sort of wider community issues that may not impact them. So let me hit pause right there. Do you guys, is the idea of the two groups differentiated a little bit in your head? And I can't see your beautiful faces to know whether or not you're here.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. All right, we'll keep going then. So what is Know the Score looking for when they're seeking out news content? They want the sort of up-to-date news angles. They're looking, as I said, for those talking points that help them have something of value to contribute in a conversation. And that's truly what for them it's all about. It's these conversations that they don't want to be kind of caught out in the cold. It reminds me of sort of the idea of back when we were going into offices, if you got caught in the elevator with your boss and they're like, oh, so did you read, that article about, the state's changing tax policy? And you're like, oh, Lord, did I read that article? Right. So this is where they want sort of the cursory understanding of like, oh, yeah, and be able to kind of talk shop a little bit about this. It reminds me of that sort of water cooler talk of old, or the way that, sports fans can just kind of talk shop about their team. That's what they're looking for, those sort of key high level talking points on all topics, though, not just sports. And as we mentioned, they want this sort of get ahead information that helps them from personal development, helps them understand their community, and gives them some business insights. So this is one of the groups too that when you talk about writing stories about top employers in the area, many of those readers are coming in on the Know the Score topics. How do these folks interact with content? Again, this is a group that is pretty quick hit. As we mentioned, they sort of want to scan through it, understand the basics of the story. They want you to explain it to them. So, when we write these sort of like why this is happening, how this worked, behind the scenes, inside, the locker room with, this one moment, that is the sort of content that readers are looking for. They will read, but you have to explain it to them in a way and give them that sort of in-depth look at, how this is going to help me understand the issue better. They're a little bit less interested in sort of community opinion. They're more so wanting to just understand the news and the kind of the factoids of a story. Okay, we're going to hear from Tyrion Morris, the nightlife reporter at the Arizona Republic. She's talking a little bit about Know the Score. And let me see if I can get this to play and have good audio here. Hang tight. Hopefully you can hear.
The Arizona Republic. One piece of advice I would have for journalists who are new to writing for the Know the Score audience is don't be afraid to write short. We know that the audience Know the Score likes to scan and read very quickly. So don't be afraid to whittle down your information into tools like bulleted lists and save the analysis for the pieces lower down in the funnel. When writing for Know the Score, the first thing that I think about is what questions would immediately pop into a reader's head when they read the headline. If writing about a new restaurant opening, those questions might be, where is the restaurant? How much does it cost? What type of food do they serve? And what's on the menu? These questions I could actually use as subheads in the story in question form to draw the reader through the article.
Okay, so let's take a quick moment. We've talked a little bit about who these people are. So if you could jot down on a piece of paper or somewhere handy, one or two people that that kind of fit this description. And if anyone is willing, I'd love to hear from someone about who it is in your life that reminds you of this group.
If not, we'll start calling on people. I'm going to call on Cameron Jordan. I see him in here. He's getting picked on.
Cameron, can you unmute and tell us a little bit about the person that you identify as Know the Score in your life?
I will do this in a second. I'm actually in an interview right now.
Oops.
It's definitely those high school sports people, though.
I'll fill
All right,
in.
Cam, you go.
I'll fill in for Cam.
Okay. Okay.
I wrote my daughter's name down. She's 37. Got 3 daughters in 14 through 8. She's not going to read a 40-inch story about anything. She doesn't have time or really the interest, but she's eat up totally with all the virus news and how it affects the schools and all that. So she's constantly reading more news than ever before, but she just wants it quickly. She just wants to know what the heck's going on. So she popped into my mind when you started talking about that.
Yeah, for sure. So when you think about what motivates her to find out news, is she reading about the news and coronavirus in schools because she cares most about her family, or because she has sort of talking points?
Well, how it affects her family.
Okay. So you've done a good job of kind of identifying the why. I think she probably actually aligns more with Family Forward, because her true motivation for reading is because of her interest in, protecting her family, making sure that she's well aware of how the virus is impacting schools and their lives. Can you think a little bit more broadly about folks in your life that may be interested in sort of, they like to read the news, they like to have the sort of, to know the kind of chatter among the community, but maybe are just more so interested in just kind of knowing everything?
I just finished up. My main answer that I had, the first one that came to mind was just your average run of the mill football coach. And the reason that came to mind is because, especially right now, there's been so many different rule changes and stuff in the past 2 weeks regarding like playoff participation and different instances like that in the high school realm. And I think the biggest thing with the coach is when you write a story, they may not have the time to read through a 30-inch piece that explains how a playoff bracket is now broken down or something like that. And so they're more interested in really getting to know, how does this affect me? How does this affect my team? And how does this affect my school? More so than everything. They just want to kind of have those quick hitting facts. So, I mean, to me, that's kind of what it is your football is a bunch of football coaches around here who may not want to take that time to fully read through a big story, but they want to know how this is going to affect them in the now and in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. Anybody else have someone in their life that they're thinking of when you talk about this category of people, this group?
I can volunteer one. It's early for me, so no camera. My sister,
Hi.
because she wants to know what's going on. She'll read novels. She just isn't going to read long news stories. The perfect example I always think of when I think of like writing out lists and stuff is for her like 10th birthday. I wrote like a 4-page letter about how great it was that she was my sister, and this card with all these words, and I gave them to her and she just didn't read them. So, because she just wasn't take the time. So it's kind of that like, nope, give it to me fast, give it to me quickly, don't make me dig for it kind of thing.
Yeah. I love how you guys are really honing in on sort of the format of these two. And Tyrion kind of talked about that a little bit as well. And I think that is 100% true. That these audiences we know are very digitally savvy, they're very time crunched. But I do want to emphasize too, because I think it's important that this audience will read. They'll stick with the story if you're presenting it in a way that does break down the information. So it doesn't have to be like all cursory glance for this group. If you can make it digestible and understandable for them, highlight those sort of takeaways, especially near the top, they'll dig in and spend some time with your stories here, much in the same way that a family forward audience will. So don't shy away from, sort of narrative writing with this group either, but know that, you really have to do a good sales job at the top of your story and in the headline to help them understand how you're going to answer those questions for them.
8-year-old me was no Shakespeare, so I understand.
I'm impressed. That's a commitment. I hope you have it somewhere that you can hold over her head for eternity.
She probably does. I probably wouldn't have kept it, but she keeps things. She just doesn't read them.
Very good. So let's dig in a little bit more on the motivation for reading with these folks. As I talked about, we're not talking about people simply about age or gender or generational group with this. They transcend all of those categories, but they're grouped because they have specific interests and reasons for reading content. And these three that are highlighted here are really the kind of 3 core reasons. They want to have those informed conversations about the news and other topics in their community. They're passionate about the sort of outside interests and hobbies. So this is where sports comes in, and the football coaches, they're going to be very honed in and read everything about that topic, but it could be something outside of sports. And I apologize, I don't know that much about Oklahoma, short of the fact that I have 2 sets of a brother and sister-in-laws that live there. But when you think about sort of the passion topics for your community, how would you identify those? And to give you an example, so in Des Moines, where I live, there's probably 2 big key passion topics here. Biking, there's a big bike ride in the community. And so there's a lot of people that get out and do a lot of bike riding on the trails, and breweries, lots of breweries popping up. And so anytime you write about, a new brewery or a brewery's launching a new set of beers, people are interested in that. So those are 2 passion topics that our community cares about. What would you identify for your guys' passion topics?
I'll share one. It was marijuana for a while.
Yeah.
legalized, and it didn't matter if you were it's just medical. So if you were just a patient, or if you were just, everybody seemed to be kind of what you're talking about, that water cooler talk, wanted to know what was happening, because it was a wild and weird time for Oklahoma. So even if it wasn't something that anybody had anything to do with, there was still a lot of interest for that, in kind of the know your score way.
Yeah, you bet, for sure. Any other sort of rec topics? Obviously, I know football is a big deal down there, but outside of football, things that you're kind of a large portion of your community likes to interact with?
I've had a lot of success in covering downtown and people's interest in recreating downtown and following what's going on. But a lot of people have a hobby almost of following what's going on.
Yeah, so like sort of the burgeoning downtown, redevelopment, people wanting to do more sort of that young interactions. I can speak of, I definitely saw that in Tulsa, where my brother lives, with, various different communities, sort of the suburbs popping up with all sorts of new development areas. So yeah, for sure, that's a great opportunity. So you see what I mean? It's not just about sports. It's about sort of these broader things that are sort of focus for your community. So when we talk about outside interests and hobbies, it extends to that as well. And then sort of the third key part of this is they want to kind of get that edge on their career. And again, this isn't Money Magazine 101. This is really about talking about, the biggest employers in your area, understanding sort of benefits and how that affects your work-life balance, and understanding sort of how key industries in your community are changing and evolving, and how that might affect workers in your community. So let's dig in on these again. I think just last week you shared a handout. You might want to consult that, because that breaks down all of this right there for you in one, kind of a nice little one sheet, and it compares as well to the family forward audiences. But we'll look at a few headlines here. Again, a lot of these coming from Nashville, for, I guess this, as I realized last thing, I was like, I think this is the last time I presented this was in Nashville. So I had a whole bunch of Nashville headlines instead of a better ranking, but we like Nashville, right? So those key talking points. So here's a few different examples. This first one, I think particularly right on point, a major politician resigns inside the last final days. So it's that sort of inside look. It's behind the scenes. It's taking me and helping me understand how this happened and giving me those sort of conversation points, right? Like the sort of, did you hear? Oh my gosh, what happened in those last few days when she was in office? Thinking about sort of the buzz around town. So this gets a little into that sort of growth and development beat as well. Why are so many Nashville restaurants closing? And again, this is the sort of neighborly. Did you hear? Oh, such and such place up there closed. Oh yeah, but it was one of, a whole bunch of others that have closed recently. Why are there more potholes in Nashville this year or in your community? And again, this is sort of that, the buzzing bullet, like where you talk about sort of the national scoop on a story too, even if it's of national interest, they want to know sort of what's that talking point. They want to know, if someone was to ask them about them, they want to know just enough about this issue to be able to dig in. And they also want to know how those sort of key issues in their community influence them. So a couple of examples here, how a government shutdown could affect you. Again, nationalizing this sort of big local story. A great example of this has been the unemployment benefit coverage that has come out of, sort of the $300, $400 extra that people got across the nation. I've seen tons and tons of really good explainer stories on, how do you get that benefit? What do you do if your unemployment claims haven't been processed? Just really helping people understand sort of the complicated process of that, and also how this money influxing in their community may affect them and their city and their taxes. Some really, really good opportunities there, given everything that's going on in our communities right now. And then again, connecting them with others who have similar interests. So, looking for, if other areas that are doing sort of growth and development. So here's 5 other hot bars you might want to hit around town. Thinking, you know, about sports, you know, obviously the depth of coverage that we have on our teams really falls into this as well. Jumping into that a little bit more, so those sort of outside interests and hobbies, obviously here in Nashville, another good example of sort of, you know, the music scene, but sort of also explaining how this contract extension or how kind of the path of this coach played out. And again, it's that sort of sports talk shop talk of, you know, oh, how did this happen? You know, you want to sound smarter than all your friends when you're talking about an issue, whether it's about any of these passion topics. They want a little bit of detail around sort of the best entertainment. And again, this isn't necessarily like looking at, you know, a movie review. That is fine and dandy for USA Today, but it's not where we are going to put our time. This is instead looking at sort of local events. And the second example here, I think, is particularly a good example of, you know, has that lineup improved? What's going to happen with sort of your local annual festivals amid the coronavirus? You know, really digging in on what to expect and how to best spend your time and money is something that this crowd likes a lot. And you'll remember too that that's a very important topic for family forward audiences as well. Similar things here, we'll just keep going on those. And again, meet those sort of key people in your community that are influencers around those passion topics. So if there's a local developer that's really spurring a lot of the sort of downtown development, people might be interested in reading a profile about him if you can kind of explain how, you know, I'm making this up, a young up-and-comer is revitalizing the Oklahoma City downtown. I'm sure you can come up with a better angle than that, but if there's an interesting story there, those are people that your community, your readers are interested in meeting. And the third category here, again, this is the folks that are looking for that edge in their business and industry. You know, again, focus in on your biggest employers in the community here. Explain to them how decisions that company is making can impact them personally or their, you know, kind of career paths. And also look at those sort of big national issues. You know, a big one that I see every year is, you know, will our tax refunds be delayed in the state? You know, let people know what's going on with their pocketbooks. Generally speaking, you know, content around sort of like small bits of hiring won't do well, but any sort of big layoffs and big hiring surges. So for example, you know, like if Amazon is opening a warehouse, or a distribution house, you know, in your community, covering that is going to do very well because they're making a sort of a wide bit of job availability. You know, really breaking down, especially business news, changes in laws, changes in sort of classifications of businesses, taxes, you know, policies that affect some of that growth and development. Thinking specifically about like there was a city council ruling, I think, that was going to make essentially housing, like affordable housing, harder to construct in Des Moines. And so, you know, we did a deeper dive on that to look at what contractors were saying about whether or not they could continue to build homes in the Des Moines metro area because of the change of this law. So really breaking down how this one change is impacting a longer term trend. You know, getting those sort of deals in your area. Again, this is a little harder in the COVID area, but this is a particularly strong technique, you know, X number of free things to do in your community, you know, X road trips to take this fall and stay socially distant. That sort of content tends to do well with this group and also family forward as well. Okay, so we went through that pretty quickly, but the best part about that is that leaves us a little bit more time today to do some chatting. So first, let's take a look at some of this content that you guys are working on. Think about a story or a topic that you're writing right now or that you just finished up that you think maybe appeals to this sort of know the score audience. So there in the middle, there's some sort of, broad topics that generally appeal to this audience. And again, the benefits that they're seeking on that right-hand side. And write down, jot down on a email to yourself or a piece of paper, what it is, how you would adjust your story, how you would adjust the angle of it. Write down what you think the headline would be to appeal to that know the score audience. We'll take 3 or 4 minutes here for you guys to work on that a little bit. And then we'll share some ideas with the group. Okay, some of you look to be working diligently. Maybe I can spy on you with your videos. We'll give you another minute or so here, and then we'll seek some volunteers to talk about their stories. Josh, where are you working? You look like you've got like some fancy office looking windows behind you. I'm always intrigued by people's work environments now in this new age.
The Oklahoman World Headquarters.
Aha. Okay, so in an office, that makes more sense.
Mask. Can't drink the coffee with the mask on.
Understood.
Yeah, I have a story that I'm working on for tomorrow.
Sure, let's go for it.
The lead is already written. Construction will begin next month on the first new grocery to be built in the East Oklahoma City in decades, fulfilling a demand made by the Black Lives Matter movement. And what I do is basically I'm going to say it's a food desert, and this is part of a larger effort to bring much needed services and retail to the minority part of town.
Okay, excellent. So when you think about the key talking points of that story, what would you kind of isolate as sort of the 2 or 3 key things that you want a reader to come away with?
The first thing would be that, we're hearing a lot of conflict and not a lot of resolution yet in the whole protests that we've seen over the summer. And this is one angle where the city is working with a local grocery store chain to change that and just putting public money into addressing a longtime need of the Black community in the East Side.
Very interesting. Great. So one thing to really think about as you kind of hone in on this topic, and I think that's a great news story, is how do you highlight those sort of 2 to 3 key talking points at the top of your story so that you can pull readers into it. It may be that, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily right for this story, but, especially like in an investigative piece, often, it's like sort of a key findings, and then it's like bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullet point 3 is one good way to kind of do that as far as like getting people into the story, giving them that nut graph, and then explaining those sort of key findings. Another strong way to think about that, and I think may be applicable particularly to your story, Steve, is the idea of kind of figuring out what those key talking points are and translating those into subheads. So, sort of bold, larger type in the middle of your kind of breaking up your story. And what we find is that the sort of scanning reader is going to, essentially they're scrolling right with their finger and they're looking for those headlines and say, oh, I'm more interested in this food desert idea, or I'm interested in how Black Lives Matter group was particularly impactful in making this happen. And so, consider about how you would structure your story to kind of answer those, to address those sort of 3 key takeaways. And then you're getting really into sort of writing that story specifically for the Know the Score audience. Jen, anything you'd add? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, subheads was my first thought with that too. I mean, it seems like there's a lot there that is interesting and of talking points. And, I feel like that's something that could easily bog down without breaking it up in a way, just because there's so much context and background of, this is a food desert and this is how, this group has helped fuel this change. I mean, and then another talking point with that too is specifically, well, what is this? What do I need to know about this particular grocer?
I
If
agree.
I live in the, what are the, so I think the subhead approach is really a really smart one for that.
Excellent, excellent. The city fundraising piece of it is interesting too, I think, and again, is an opportunity where the story could get bogged down. So, separating that out or looking at how do you address that in sort of a scannable way is smart. How about another topic? Anyone want to volunteer?
Does Randy have one? Randy, I'm calling you out because I have an example of one that you did recently that fits this perfectly and did really well. So I was going to praise you for that, but I wanted to give you a chance to see if you had one coming up that you wanted to share. Oh, we're having trouble hearing you. He's doing the old move his lips but not speak trick on Zoom. Randy, we're having trouble. We may have to come back another time. I was going to share though, Randy did a story recently on how much revenue could be generated if the toll roads were rented out, and it skyrocketed to the top of our readership page that day. And I think it was very much it hit all the check marks for. It's a topic everybody likes to talk about. They're kind of interested in, even though, to be quite honest, the toll roads aren't going to affect your day-to-day life too much one way or the other. So Randy put it together. He added some context with calling some of the transportation folks and discussing some of the results of this study that had been done, that sort of thing. So pretty interesting. And obviously it resonated with a lot of people, as it got, I think it may have gotten over 10,000 page views that day.
Can you hear me now or not? Or?
Yeah,
there we are.
I just changed the microphones. I don't know, they had 2 different ones. So, okay. Yeah, probably about half those people were just mad at the idea that they were thinking about trying to extend the turnpikes. There's always this feeling among Oklahomans that someday those things should expire and it should be free again, which is probably never going to happen. But it always gets a rise whenever those topics comes up. What I was going to talk about working on now, I've been working for some time on different stories about Indian gaming, which probably wouldn't have so much interest if you're in Texas, but our governor totally disrupted the whole system when he claimed that the compacts all expired the first of the year and got sued by the tribes. And about 10% or so of our population is Native American. So their budgets of a lot of these gaming tribes are extensively linked to that. So if they were to lose their gaming, they would also lose a lot of things in healthcare and everything else. So it becomes a matter of intense interest. What I'm trying to work on at the moment and get more clarity to is the Supreme Court just recently struck down 2 of the compacts that the governor tried to negotiate with 2 separate tribes, kind of cutting his own deals with them. The Supreme Court said that they were invalid because they would bring in sports betting and certain types of card games. So But even though they struck it down, it's not clear what happens now. Those two tribes, I think they're just continuing on like nothing happened, and I think the governor's fine with that. But the Supreme Court has said it's invalid. So what happens and how and who tries to enforce it? I mean, I think those are going to be pretty interesting issues. But I'm having trouble getting anybody to give me any answers. I think because nobody really wants to talk about it because they don't want to address it. They're hoping it goes away.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of really good topics there. A couple points that I'll make, and then we'll keep going. So this is sort of a interesting timing opportunity. So I'm gonna drag this over. I think hopefully it still shares. Did my screen update here to show this what we know story, Jen?
Yep.
Perfect. So one of the things as you were talking, Randy, this push alert from USA Today came in. And as you were talking about that Supreme Court story, it really struck me that it's one of those really meaty, complicated issues, and there's a lot of questions out there about where the impacts are. And so this is a technique that that we've used across the network for a couple of years now. This sort of what we know, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. Sometimes is an effective headline with that. What you need to know, how this could work. So this sort of format is particularly powerful when you have those really big, complicated issues. Obviously, Breonna Taylor here. What we know about this situation that's evolving can be a really effective way. These do really well with search engines because people that are Googling that topic want to dig in on it. And you can see that it just kind of breaks down. So here's the latest updates. This may be, I had just read the headline, so this has fewer subheads and chunks in here than what I would expect. But this sort of approach where you sort of like, you've got a short introduction and then sort of, what we know about the judge's ruling, how that could affect gaming revenue for the tribes. If gaming revenue is nixed, what that means for healthcare, schools in, tribal communities. So those sort of chunks really break down that complicated issue. And make it very scan friendly for readers that are interested, but just can't dig through, 3,000 words worth of, report translation. So that might be a technique to consider, Randy, on that story.
So you wouldn't shy away at all of saying there's a lot that's not known?
No. I think you want to try to emphasize, of course, what we do know, but it's not unheard of to be able to say, here's what we don't know. Here's what's coming next. And that's still to be determined by state officials. And that's potentially a whole nother chunk of the story. So no, I wouldn't shy away from that. I think the sort of transparency with readers about where we are in the process of this is very important. And it gives them insights into, the nature of our reporting. It's telling them that we're reporting these issues to you as a community because they're important to you when we have information. And we're going to update it and we're going to come back to it as we get more information out of public officials. And it speaks a little bit to that sort of accountability role that we have as journalists and be able to say, hey, we need answers on this. Here's what we know so far. We've asked for these other answers to be answered by the government. We're going to come back to that more. And that definitely is a technique that we've seen do well across the network. I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but we could probably dig around for one if that would be helpful. But
no, that's okay. I just was wondering how people would view that. I'm having trouble getting answers out of the governor's office, out of the Office of Management and Enterprise Services, out of the tribes themselves. I think part of it may be just they're uncertain themselves.
Randy, I think with that example, both sides are trying to present themselves as being for the people and for the Oklahomans and arguing, in their case. And so to show that, hey, they may say this, but they're also not answering questions about what this is. I think people will resonate with that to see, okay, both sides are trying to tell me that they're on my side, but neither one seems to want to answer these very straightforward questions from Randy. And then, as Kelly said, when they get answered, then you can follow up on it.
Well, as Kelly said too, it's really a valuable technique for trust with your audience because your audience doesn't know what you don't tell them. And so, and that's something I don't think we think about a lot. Like, of course I'm asking these questions over and over and over again. Well, if we're not getting answers and then we're not reporting it out, our readers are like, well, why aren't you asking them these questions? And so, you know, in addition to kind of putting pressure on the sources to actually give you some answers and help get some public pressure on them, it, you know, it lets the public know, like, yeah, I'm frustrated too. I'm frustrated that we haven't gotten, and I'm asking, and I'm going to keep asking.
Yeah, I was just Googling a little bit because actually I think this was a little bit part of the Breonna Taylor saga too. This isn't maybe in a one-to-one example with a, you know, sort of thing that you're looking for, Randy, but, you know, sort of that reporting on that, you know, details aren't being released to the public that technically should be as part of open records laws. I mean, that is something also that we can report out. Like I said, a little different than what your scenario is, Randy, but I don't think you should necessarily shy away from the sort of idea that here's what we know, here's what should be coming next, here's what's still to be determined. I mean, you don't have to say what we don't know. Here's what's still to be determined. You know, find the right language to talk around that. So a couple of one other quick point. One thing you'll notice is that the sort of language that we've used a lot, especially with this audience group, is the sort of what's, how's, why's. Those sort of, that sort of phrasing, especially in headlines, is particularly effective. And then the other thing that I would just emphasize too is that, and this kind of rang in my brain a little bit about when you're talking about the toll roads, is that sometimes pulling apart a complicated story like that into sort of more of a news of, you know, the policy change will do very well with that sort of middle and lower part of the audience. But sometimes pulling out a sort of explainer piece on the how and the why something is going to happen, how it's going to impact you, how it could impact your pocketbook in this case potentially, or how it could impact your commute. You know, for the folks that drive, you know, let's say you commute between Oklahoma City and Tulsa, like you're going to pay tolls. How is that going to affect you? Pulling those out as separate URLs can also be very effective in drawing in new audience that wouldn't have otherwise dug in on sort of the more traditional policy change piece of it. So just some great topics there, and just a lot of different techniques that you can experiment with. Don't feel like you have to kind of hammer one topic into one story. You have the opportunity to kind of pull them apart to reach those different audiences.
I dropped a link in the chat out of Milwaukee. It was about the Kenosha shooting, and their headline is literally what we know and what we don't. And then they kind of,
yeah, that was one.
Questions. So if you're looking for an example, that's a good one.
That is a good one. I'm jotting that down. Kenosha.
And that was one of their top stories out of that, out of the week kind of following that shooting.
Yeah, for sure. Great example, Jen. Okay, so let's, we had some good discussion there. We're going to want to wrap things up here a little bit. So I want to talk just a little bit more broadly about sort of, you know, we've talked about the funnel, we've talked about these audience groups. You can see that there's a lot of passion around the sort of storytelling that we want to get in front of our readers and these audiences. But so, you know, how do you really put that to work in sort of your day-to-day beats, right? So these are sort of 5 key steps that we've identified as, you know, one, as you're thinking about a story, a topic of conversation that you're going to write or that you think you want to write, who is it that's going to read it? Which audience? Is it most likely going to impact a family forward audience or a know the score audience? Is it top of funnel, middle of funnel? You know, who is it that you're writing that story for? And then start understanding what those benefits are that group is going to seek. So, you know, are they seeking are they interested in this topic because they want to improve something about their family, because they want to know how to get the best deal when they're going out in the community, because they want to understand how this is going to affect their commute? You know, what is it that they're seeking to get out of that story? And then apply that to your topic. Think about that as sort of, you know, is this the angle of the whole story, or an angle of kind of a sub part of the story? What is that? How do you hone in your headline and your lead and your social chatter to really emphasize that benefit, so that when a reader sees it on Facebook, that they say, oh, yeah, I want to know the benefit. I want to know that. I want to answer that question. And this story is going to help me do it. So when we think about sort of really putting this into motion, we're talking mostly about headlines and story angles, the top of your story, and how do you really make that promise to a reader that the benefit that they're seeking is what they're going to get out of this. As I mentioned, think about the fact that your topic could have multiple URLs. They don't all have to publish on the same day, or they could publish on the same day. But think about, this topic that you're writing about very broadly, and think about what parts of it interest different types of people. And then the last part, and we'll hear from a reporter on this too, is thinking about how do you get this story then? You've done all this work, you've done all this thinking. How do I get it in front of the audience? How do I put it out there? Where are they going to find this, right? We talked about this sort of digital landscape is busy. People aren't coming to our homepages anymore. Where are they going to find this? Are they going to find it on Facebook? If it's politics or sports, they're going to probably find it on Twitter. What's my approach there? Do I do a tweet thread? Do I do a tweet story? Do I have some social graphics that make sense to work with a producer on to get made? Is this more of a sort of Reddit conversation starter? Are there great visuals that go with this? Is there a video that I should be putting together for this so that I find that audience as well? So think about those sort of questions when you think about, this is my story. I mean, we could put this into a worksheet for you to fill out, but that's not really that's not the point of this. It's as you think about your topics that you want to write about, how do I answer these sort of key areas around the benefit that the reader is seeking and how I'm going to get that, my story to them. So let me show you this video from Graham Couch, and then we'll take a little bit more time to wrap things up and talk about, sort of get a little bit of thought even from Dish on how we really do this in the real world.
Focus and workflow. I think it's important that you don't just focus on the story. And yes, you've got to report, you've got to write well, you've got to do all that, but you need to take almost as much time in the presentation and delivery. Like, I think of us, we are also the paper boys from, years ago, and that we have to deliver the product. And if you don't get it in the right places, you don't get it to your audience, then you might as well not write it. And you need to think about that. You need to be able to take the time to write a really quality headline in different areas too. Your main headline, your front headline, your SEO headline, and think about what those should be, and understand the different character lengths and how to use those, and then write separate headlines for Facebook and Twitter, separate lead-ins, and understand how those work, and what times you should post on Facebook, when you should post on Twitter. Well, to not post twice on Facebook. These are things that are, it's important to live in that world a little bit too, because it really makes a difference in driving that audience. To understand Facebook groups you can post it in, and where you can find people, and where they can share it. It's about getting your work in front of people, and that thought process is as important as the actual reporting and writing.
Great. So some really good points there. And obviously that's an area where you have hopefully a lot of support in your newsroom. It's understandable that you all may not have, all of the ins on what your Facebook feed looks like, your brand Facebook feed looks like. So reach out to folks, and Dish, maybe this is a good point of kind of conversation around workflow. How does that happen? Who should they talk to when, they've got a sort of story idea formulated for one of these audiences? Who should they talk to about the next steps for getting it in front of those audiences on social, talking with their editor about, breaking it apart, that sort of thing. Can you give us a little bit of sort of off the cuff insight on how that process can work?
Yeah, so obviously we're all learning along with you guys. We're maybe a fraction of a step ahead, because then we set up a meeting to then have to share what we've just learned, almost as recently as a few days before. So it's not like we're too far advanced in this, but the more we go and the more that we've started to implement and try to work on these, our new budget, for example, we're trying to get better at planning ahead. We want to make sure, as you guys are coming up with stories, or if we assign stories, either way, that we start in on that thinking about the presentation from the get-go, instead of in the past where it was write the story, report it, send it in to get edited, and then we'd scramble to get something for the next day in print, because it's no longer just the one photo that's needed, to hold the story. If it's going to be if we're gonna, run a photo in print, because we've got to have all those other aspects, and or at least be thinking about whether or not we need those other aspects. It reminds me, yesterday I was having a conversation with Steve about a project he's working on, and how, okay, if we can get this content uploaded and at least started and kind of in the works using Microsoft Teams, where we can collaborate and I can help out and provide feedback, and we can get Todd Pendleton in there to start seeing stuff so that he can start building graphics and social media cards and that sort of thing. We're going to have a much more engaging, robust story that will ultimately perform better, reach more of an audience, and scratch these know the score and family forward itches that our audience has, simply because we start work earlier on having those conversations. And so as we ask you guys to, and I know it's the worst, to try and learn new systems, and we've got plenty more coming as we switch over into new systems and a new website and all that. It's going to be a lot of learning, but we're trying to implement tools and stuff to help us streamline that, to make it easier on you all as we do this sort of thing. So I think Kelly mentioned the social media aspects of things. And I know we've asked you guys to start writing your own social media chatter. And that's more just to allow you guys the ownership of the subject material that you guys know best. And we're going to have some training on how to strengthen some of that and make sure that it's stuff that really resonates, and little tips and tricks on that sort of thing. But Kelly's right. We have web guys who are going to help make sure all that's done right and optimized, and we're getting more and more resources with that as we go too. So yeah, I would say just the more than anything, we've got to continue to shift toward earlier conversations about our subject material.
Yeah, for sure. That sort of dialogue, I think, between editor and reporter early in the process is really key to identifying these audiences. And as just kind of said, that the editors are going to meet and talk about some of the techniques that other newsrooms around the network have employed to try and make this a little bit more streamlined. To give you a little bit of sort of a preview of that, I mean, some places do like a story planning list, and every story that a reporter is working on, and then they detail, is it for a funnel, top of funnel audience, or a middle of the funnel audience, is it for family forward or know the score. So there's some very rigid practices that can be done, and there's other newsrooms that do it in a much less formal way, and just having sort of the conversation between coach and editor, like whenever you have your weekly and one-on-ones, if that's the case. So think about it a little bit for yourself, and sort of, if I was to say, every story that you write, we want you to have sort of that, broad idea of who these audiences are, how would you talk to your editor about that? Would you include that in an email that you send as a planning note? Do you have a sort of Word doc or rolling file that you might maintain? Is that sort of a conversation that you have? So think a little bit about that. Try to have a conversation with your editor about this training and how it impacts your beat over the course of the next couple of days, so that as your editor meets with other editors about this, that they've heard from you about, sort of the workflow implications and how you think you can kind of help communicate around this.
I would say, ask to hold us accountable too, if we're doing something that is counterintuitive to this, or if it's one of us clinging to an old print mentality or something along those lines. Please hold us accountable and ask us, because we should be able to defend whatever decision we're making. And then also, as we learn and grow together, please keep an open mind and have that intellectual flexibility to adapt and change and sometimes drop things that we've done for, I mean, goodness, that this industry has done for over 100 years, that we may change drastically because we're seeing such difference. So yeah, we've all got to stay flexible and willing to learn on that sort of thing. So
great way to wrap things up, and 100% agree on that. Okay, well, I think we are at time. Please feel free to route any questions on any of this. I'll say to Jennifer. She's your direct contact on all this, but I've really enjoyed getting to meet all of you and hearing your story ideas. I follow your Parsley lists every day, and so I will no doubt be seeing some of these and be excited to see how you guys put audience to work every single day in the jobs that you do. It's so critically important in helping us grow and become sustainable, and also just serving the needs of our readers. You know, they are the people that we ultimately serve, and so helping them understand the key issues in our community are what's at the core of this, and elevating our very smart journalism that can make change in our communities. So
Kelly,
so much.
I wanted to say real quick, several of you this is your third one. You've completed this audience training. So congratulations. A few more of you, if you missed the first meeting, we have the second option of that is this afternoon. So make sure you're there. That's at 2. And then if you missed the second meeting, that option is got that full schedule in Microsoft Teams, where we've got it. And that's your reminder to make sure you're getting it, Microsoft Teams. So some of you I'll see this afternoon for the first training, and then some of you I'll see for the second training later this week. So, all right. See y'all.
Thank you.